Hello everyone, it's CPUSA, and I hope you guys are enjoying that new intro video that we have up. Anyways, today I was sent an article by a friend, a different friend from last time, but still a friend, and I would like to do a video on the article they sent me, which is from Canada. They're a Canadian friend of mine, and it's about the Prime Minister, basically the President, Trudeau. I don't know how to pronounce that, something French. Unveils details of assault-style gun buyback program and municipal gun ban. So I want to go over this and break down exactly what's wrong with all of this. I might not get through the whole article, but because it's pretty long, and I'm trying to cut down on my video lengths. But let's get through as much of this as possible, starting with this opening video here.
Legislation intended to crack down on gun violence.
When it comes to keeping Canadians safe from gun violence,
I'm assuming that this is the president here.
we need more than thoughts and prayers. We need concrete action.
The legislation calls for increased penalties for gun smuggling and stepped up enforcement at the border. There's also a buyback program and a provision for
Liberals enforcing border laws? What is this? Maybe Canada isn't such a bad place.
Municipalities to ban handguns. So for more on the bill and everything involved, let's bring in our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stevenson. Good morning, Mercedes. A lot of layers to this legislation, or the proposed legislation, if you will. Break this down for us. What are the key points?
So it's about a 45-page bill, and it has a suite of approaches to try to reduce gun crime and gun violence. And you actually listed a few of them.
There's no such thing as gun crime and gun violence. There's such a thing as people using guns to commit crimes and to commit violence.
And covered them quite well, Anthony. So let's unpack them.
Guns don't shoot people. People shoot people with guns. Guns don't go and pick themselves up and murder people. So gun crime is already a skewed term, but let's keep going.
A little bit and what's in each one. We'll come back to the gun buyback program because that's one of the biggest, but essentially it's designed at legal gun owners, telling the government they have guns that as of May of last year are now considered to be illegal going.
So if y'all don't know, there was apparently a bill passed in Canada last year in May that took a bunch of different models of firearms and deemed them illegal to have in Canada. I'm not particularly sure what all types of models of firearms are on that list. I believe it's not super vague like AR-15s or 1911s or AK-47s. I believe it goes more specific into like specific models of firearms from specific manufacturers. So it's not like just one design of firearm is illegal to have, but that's what she's talking about.
Forward. There's about 1,500 firearms on that list, and the government will then buy them back to get them off the streets. There's also tougher penalties for things like if you're smuggling or trafficking guns, certain gun components, or large ammunition cartridges into.
I don't know why anybody would do that after the invention of 3D printed firearms. I mean, you can 3D print an AK lower receiver, or an AK receiver, an AR lower receiver, or Glock frames, or CZ frames. You can just 3D print all of it, and 3D printers are still perfectly legal. So the left loves to cry and complain about ghost guns, but honestly, that's why gun control is never going to work in this fashion that she's talking about, is because it's already been outdated.
To Canada, so they're trying to deter people there with a tougher sentence. There's also new red flag laws. A red flag law is when somebody is concerned about the safety of a firearm, and typically they would call the police, the RCMP specifically, who can determine what.
A lot of the weapons they're showing here are military grade. So like this one here is, I can't tell, I need to see more of it, but from the carry handle and the feed mechanism, it looks like some kind of M240 Bravo or an M60 or a model of LMG like that, a squad automatic weapon essentially. which is highly illegal to have, even here in America, even with the right permits. There's an insane amount of paperwork to do for these. So this you wouldn't even find already. So this is already just media fear-mongering, showing a weapon like this, because you can't have it in the first place.
Whether or not that gun license should be revoked. This law will make it easier for the police to do that, but it will also mean that more than just doctors and police officers can go to the courts. Anyone will be able to put in a red flag complaint against somebody else and actually take it to court.
Yes, because that's not going to result in politically abused systems and people attacking other people for personal reasons and not just because they know that the other person has a gun. Yeah, this is definitely a sound system.
So those are a few of the items. You mentioned the border as well. We're still waiting to see exactly what that one means because, of course, especially in cities like Toronto, there's a lot of concern about guns coming across the border. Guns that came across the border were used in the Nova Scotia massacre. And there's going to be essentially an ability for the CBSA, the border agency, to kick people out if they have a criminal record on that or if they break certain rules. It's not clear to me whether there's actually more money in this for enforcement at the border just yet.
But it's intriguing as well because gun control advocates are saying this doesn't go far enough.
Nothing ever does for gun control advocates. You can't satisfy those people because the only thing that they would be satisfied with is completely removing the technology from existence. And even if you did that, then they'd start going after other weapons because they just don't like the idea of people being able to defend themselves.
For many reasons, but one including the buyback program, which is voluntary under this proposed legislation. And others say it goes too far and it targets really the wrong people.
Yeah, because politicians never want to solve the actual problem. You see, there's, I forget what it's called, but it's like a logic fallacy. I'd have to look it up. But basically it states that when you have a government that wants to gain power, the easiest way to do it is to either create a problem or say that there's a problem, get into power elected on the promise of solving that problem, then to the outside world make it look like you're solving that problem, but at the same time make it worse, which is essentially what gun control advocates and what pro-gun control politicians have been doing for like 60 years. They get into power, they make it harder on law-abiding citizens who are never the problem. In fact, they're the solution most of the time. They make it easier for criminals to get firearms, and they make it easier for firearms to come across borders illegally, or for firearms to end up on the black market, or for basically they make it easier for criminals to get firearms, and they don't prosecute those kinds of cases typically. They go after law-abiding citizens to make it look like they're the problem, and thus you have an infinite cycle which repeats on itself. And the only people who get screwed over in it are regular people that they originally got into power claiming that they were going to help. So that's the gun control fallacy, as I'm just going to call it right now.
But what about political support in the end? Because this is a minority government. Does it have enough, support in Ottawa to get this done?
Well, we'll see. I mean, certainly we heard from the Bloc leader yesterday that he did not support it because the gun buyback program is not mandatory. The Conservatives don't support it because they say, as you were saying, that it simply goes too far, that it's targeting people who've been legal gun owners, and the real problem is guns being smuggled, guns being stolen. To unpack a little bit what it means with that mandatory versus non-mandatory buyback, no matter what, the guns are illegal. So you have to lock them up, never use them again, never shoot them again. Of course, theoretically, when they're being used in crime, it's already an illegal gun. But what this program would do is to buy them back if you want to get rid of it, versus just have it sitting around in very tight storage, never able to use it or move it again. The issue with that, gun control advocates say, is that it doesn't get the guns off the streets. They're still out there. They could still be stolen. They could still be sold. And there's very little detail about what this gun buyback program is actually going to look like. The government couldn't give us an estimate yesterday of how much they
never can, because they never intend to do it.
would pay per firearm, although they said maybe around $1,300. They estimated $3 to $4 million.
$1,300. Okay. I would just like to state that the price of a decent AR, like a decent AR that you can actually run as a usable setup and not just something that you're going to go out to the range and plink with, that the price tag for those usually starts around 1,300 and it only goes up. And there's a lot of firearms out there that aren't ARs, that are much less common than ARs, where, for an MP5, you're probably paying around $5,000 just to get a civilian model, even if it's a clone. They're not cheap at all. And again, I said the cost only goes up, so you're essentially gypping people money here. So like I said, and almost always these buyback programs never materialize. The media will talk about them when they're in the planning stage, but they never talk about how the money inevitably disappears into politicians' pockets and that these programs historically crash and burn spectacularly.
For the program.
I would just like to say that the buyback program has been tried in the United States before. In New York, in 1993, they tried a buyback program. It fell on its face horrifically. All of the money disappeared that it was supposed to go back to buying back the guns, and the program crashed and burned, and the media never covered it because it was a political scandal. So that's almost always what happens with buyback programs.
Well, we spoke to the Canadian Sport Shooting Association. They said that clearly doesn't account for all the guns that are in stores like Cabela's and sports shooting stores where people are going to buy them. So it could be closer to $3 to $4 billion. So there's still a lot of questions around that. And there's still a lot of questions as well around how this is going to work with cities. Because one of the things that the bill does is allow for a municipal handgun ban.
So what does that mean? It basically means that they're leaving it up to individual cities to say, you know what, we're going to decide that handguns are legal or illegal to have in our territory. Now, this is why having something like the Second Amendment is so important, and why we're so fortunate as Americans to have it, and why we need to protect it, is because you don't want to leave it up to the government what your rights are as a citizen. You want it set in stone from the moment the government is created, and the government can't go and touch it again. That's what the Second Amendment is, and it's been the biggest pain in the left's back in America, other than the First Amendment, really since the left's inception on our soil. Not so in Canada. They don't have a Second Amendment up there. The government is free to infringe upon gun rights as much or as little as it wants.
How does a city do that? How does a city enforce it? How do you stop it from being moved between cities? Handguns are actually the #1 firearm that is used in firearms homicides. So,
wow, they admit it up there. They're not as dumb as the ones down here who claim that rifles are the problem. No, handguns are the problem, and it's why here in the United States you have to be at least 21 to get them, whereas with other firearms you can be 18 and purchase them. Handguns are statistically the gun that you use the most in criminal activities. Why? It's smaller and easier to conceal. Whereas if you're lugging around a big old shotgun or a semi-automatic rifle, it's much harder to conceal.
So if that's the case, why is the federal government not banning it? Why are they leaving it to the cities? So I think you're still going to see a lot of debate around this bill. It has to go through Parliament and the Senate. I would expect some elements of it could change in a minority government, and it may not even pass before the next election. But essentially, that's where we're at this point, Anthony.
So I'm just going to breeze through the rest of the article here. So the Prime Minister says the federal government is launching the long-promised buyback program. You see, how long have they been promising this? Comment below. And it's only now materializing, and it won't go anywhere, I'm guaranteeing you. Because it never does. It never does. As assault or assault-style firearms, by the way, that term was invented by Adolf Hitler to characterize the MP-38 machine gun. And get it out of the hands of the German people, and specifically the Jewish people, before the Holocaust, because he didn't want the stormtroopers running up against resistance from the Jewish people who they were going to go and persecute. The The buyback program is part of a suite of new gun control measures promised by the federal liberals in the 2019 election campaign and follows the announcement of an executive order last May that changed the classification listings to prohibit roughly 1,500 assault-style weapons. Again, this is a term created by Adolf Hitler to characterize a singular weapon. While terms like assault style and assault rifle are not legal classifications in Canada, they are frequently used colloquially by gun control advocates and government to describe the type of high-capacity, quick-fire guns targeted by the ban. Quick-fire. So define quick-fire to me. Is quick-fire one pull of the trigger resulting in multiple rounds being fired? Is quick-fire resulting in one pull of the trigger resulting in one bullet being fired and the action resetting another round so that you can fire it semi-automatically? What does quick-fire mean? I'd have to have that term defined to me because quick-fire is a very vague term when it comes to firearms and their action types. And high capacity, there's no such thing. Anybody who's ever owned a gun knows that you can never have too many bullets in a firearm. The myth of high-capacity magazines is to scare people who've never owned firearms into thinking something like 30 rounds isn't enough, or no, 30 rounds is too much, when in reality it's the bare minimum. High-capacity was what they used to get stuff like above 10-round magazines banned here in California. It's the dumbest thing ever, and anybody who's ever actually laid hands on a firearm at a range knows that 10 rounds is completely terrible and is not going to do anything in an actual fight. Automatic firearms are already prohibited in Canada, as are high-capacity magazines, so I'm assuming that means anything over 10 rounds. Automatic firearms is any firearm that has an action type of full auto, meaning that you can hold down the trigger and it'll keep cycling the action until you take your finger off of the trigger. So he said last May that legislation to be implemented, a buyback program would not be introduced until the immediate crisis of the coronavirus pandemic was under control. Oh yes, because they love their coronavirus, and now that it's wearing off, they want to milk it for every last cent of power it's worth. Then they'll move on to this gun control thing and milk that for every cent of power it's worth. He also stressed it would take time to come up with a proposal that could win support from at least one other party in a minority parliament. So what that essentially means is that they don't have enough votes to get this passed in their parliament, in their Senate. We've charted a plan of action. It'll go nowhere. He said, noting the buyback program will be finalized in the coming months and will prevent those weapons from being bequeathed or sold. So essentially, you have two choices. Either become a criminal for owning something legally when it was purchased legally, and you treated it legally as a responsible gun owner, or give it to the government and give up a form of self-defense. Especially when in Canada there's a bunch of churches being vandalized and burned right now. I think it was 20 within a month or something. I'd have to look the article up, but this is just about power. And unlike in America, there's no law strictly preventing them from doing this, which is what liberals in America have been trying to circumvent for more than 100 years, but they've never been able to do because it was set in stone at the very founding of the nation. Canada didn't have that luxury, and we're seeing the results. You can't fight gun violence or any violence on just one front. That's true. You need to be proactive. You need to teach people the dangers of firearms in schools. You need to have them train on firearms in schools. You need to have them understand that it's not a toy. You need to have them understand the laws behind it. You need to have them understand what kinds of guns are out there and how to defend yourselves from it. That's the kind of gun control that I advocate for. To teach kids in schools about firearms so that you're not having a bunch of idiots in the world who don't know the first thing about firearms and vote irrationally for irrational measures. If we have actual gun control, it would be actually training kids in school to use them, to know the laws surrounding them, and on top of that, how to defend yourselves from them. That is the kind of gun control that is proactive and will get rid of a lot of gun violence, quote unquote gun violence, people using guns to commit violence. Conservative public safety critic Shannon Stubbs called the announcement disappointing in a joint statement issued from Richard Martel, the party's Quebec lieutenant. Instead of targeting law-abiding Canadians and firearms retailers, the government should be investing in police, anti-gang, and anti-gun units, and the CBSA, basically their version of ICE, I believe, to provide law enforcement with the resources they need to stop illegal smuggling operations and get dangerous criminals and gangs off the streets. You see, that's another way to be proactive, is to go after the actual problem. But as I talked about with the gun control fallacy, that's not what gets politicians power, so they're almost never going to do it unless they're actually meaning to do good for the people, which, as we know, very few politicians ever are. Conservatives have and will always support common sense firearms policies that keep guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals. We are calling on the Trudeau Liberals to ensure that Canadian firearms legislation is based on evidence, not ideology, and respects the rights of Canadians. Yeah, never going to happen. So for reference, I've been told that the Conservatives in Canada are more like liberals down here, and that the liberals in Canada are like the far left here in America. But anyways, I think that's going to wrap up my video on this whole scandal, basically. And it's a good lesson for us here in America that this is the ultimate game plan of liberals, of the gun control lobby. So it's our job here in America to make sure that this never happens, and that the people who would sell us out regardless never obtain the power where they can circumvent something like the Second Amendment. So anyways, that's going to be all from me today. Stay armed and stay safe, Patriots.
Well, that was idiotic. Off to hang myself. Off and left.